Hey everybody, my name is Alex with Hake Hardware, and in this video we are going to install Samba on Linux and get a shared drive that I can access with both my Linux machines and with my Windows machines. So this is super helpful because I'm often switching between computers or logging into different computers and I need to share files across all of them, and this is a great way to do it. I've done this a lot in the past, but I typically just leave them permissionless. But this time I want to make a special Samba user that I can use to log into my Samba share. And this will be a user that you can't use to log in with Linux. It'll be specific for Samba. So we'll go over all those steps on how to set up something like that. So looking at some of the steps we're going to need to take, we have to install Samba. We're going to set up the Samba config. We're going to create the Samba user group. Then we're going to set up the folder that we want to share, make sure it has the appropriate permissions, create a user for Samba that will be able to access that drive. And then that way, when we go to our Windows computer, we can use that user to log into the drive. Same with our other Ubuntu or Linux computers. We're able to use that username and password to log in. And then finally, I'll show you how to actually map the network drive in Windows and then mount the network drive in Ubuntu. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot to cover, but it will go pretty quickly. The hardest part, not only to implement, but to conceptualize, is how the permissions work. I'm not an expert at this. I messed this up so many times trying to figure it out. I think I have a grasp on it now. But if you get confused, there's got to be some good YouTube videos out there on how Linux permissions work. And hopefully I'm not too far off with some of my explanations. But if you follow along, we should be able to get this set up correctly. So I'm going to jump over into Termius here, and we are going to get started. So I'm in Jack, and the first thing we want to do is install Samba. So make sure you update your system, sudo apt update, and that way we can get the latest repositories and sources here for Samba, just in case there's a new version out, and then sudo apt install Samba. Now, I already have Samba installed, so you'll see it go through with a few little steps, and then it'll actually be running when it's completed. And part of that installation process is setting up a config file. Now, we're just going to back up the existing config, and then we're going to create an entirely new config that's specific to our shared drive. And it's just easier and cleaner, I think, to do it this way. So the first thing you're going to want to do is rename the existing config to config.old. That way we're maintaining the existing one, and then we can create our own new one. So we'll do sudo mv, and that's technically move, but when you move a file, you're basically renaming it in a sense. So we'll do etc samba smb.conf, and we're going to be renaming it to etc samba smb.conf.old. So basically we're moving this file into this new file, which is going to be our backup. And then we can create our own new one where the old one was. So sudo nano etc samba smb.conf. Now we're going to be setting up our config file, and I'm going to copy and paste our config that we're going to be working with from here. And I'm not going to go too deep into explaining what everything does, but I do want to touch on a few things. At the top here, these are our global settings. A lot of them are just default good to use. You don't need to really worry about changing those. You can use them as is. The second part here, now this is our share drive that we're creating. And this top part is the name. So you can do, like, I actually have to move up to it here. We can do my files, my drive, my share, and then this is going to be the path. So let's say you have mounted a new SSD drive that you want to use as your Samba share. You can actually use the mount folder that you mounted it to, assuming that it's a statically mounted um, directory that it mounts to every single time you boot. You can use that as your share if you want, or you could create a folder inside that and share just that folder because maybe you want to only share some of the files on that SSD. The point is, even though you haven't created necessarily the path, you can enter it in here. But if you do have it, because it's the mount point for your drive, you can just put it in here. I know already that I'm going to be creating a folder under /media that I'm going to be sharing. Now it's going to be on my operating system drive because I don't have anything mounted there, but the concepts are going to be pretty much the same. The rest of these are just, pretty standard for a shared drive that has permissions. We're saying we don't want guests to have access. We don't want it to be read-only because we are going to read and write data. Our valid users are going to be anybody in the SMB users group. So anybody that needs access to this drive will need to be in the SMB users group. And when we log in from another computer, they're going to be logging into a user that has access to the SMB users group. These two are basically when a file or a folder is created in the share, these are going to be the default permissions that are applied. So 6 means read and write. So we want files, when they're created, to have read and write permissions, and directories should have read, write, and executable. So that's what 7 is. And the reason why directories need to have the executable is because to traverse a directory, you need that executable permission. And I did name these the path, my share, and the network share, my share. They don't have to be the same name. The folder can be entirely different than what you name the share. But I do recommend like no white spaces, just a like underscore or like a single word for your share, just to keep things easy. We'll do Control X, Y, then Enter. And then let me clear out some of this. The next thing we're going to want to do is set up our Samba group. So like you saw in the config, we need a group that will grant users access to this drive. So we'll do sudo group add and then smb users. And now anybody that gets added to this group will have access to the folder once we set up the permissions for the folder. But just preemptively, we're going to add the current user to the SMB users group. That way, the user that's logged in to the Linux server that has the Samba share will have local access. Because if we look at my current user, Hake Hardware, we can do ID Hake Hardware. I'm not in the SMB users group because it was literally just created. So when we set the permissions for that folder, I won't have access to it because it's going to have access for the root user and the SMB users group. I'm neither of those, so I wouldn't be able to do anything locally, which to me doesn't make sense. So the first thing we're going to do now that we created that group is sudo user mod. So we're going to modify one of our users, -ag, so add to the group, SMB users, and then your username. So for me, Hake Hardware. Now if I do ID Hake Hardware, we can see I am in the SMB users group and I'm going to have access to modify files and folders inside my share. Now, typically this doesn't take effect immediately. What you're going to have to do is new group and then SMB users. Basically tells the system, hey, I created a new group. I want that to be reflected in the current terminal. So I could have logged out and logged back in, and that would have the same effect basically as doing what I did with this command. If I tried to use the permissions granted to me by being in the SMB users group without doing that, I would get a permission denied. Okay, so we've created the group, we've added our current user to the group, and then we've refreshed our terminal basically so that everybody knows that we're in that group. We've broadcasted that. And now what we're going to do is set up our shared folder. Now, if you already have your folder created, because it's a mount drive, you can skip this first part where we create the directory. For me, I'm going to do sudo make dir media my share. Now, when I create this, you'll see that it's on the left side is the user, on the right side is the group. So we've been talking about users, we've been talking about groups. This is how it's represented in permissions or ownership, really. Permissions are on the left here, ownership is here, and the permissions and ownership, well, the ownership is represented in the permissions. So D is for directory, my share is a directory, RWX stands for read, write, executable. That's for the user. The second RWX, and if there's the dash, it means that permission doesn't exist for that, is for the group. So R, no writable, and executable. So right now, if I were, and we're going to set the group ownership to SMB users, they wouldn't be able to write. So not only do we have to set the ownership, but we also have to set the permissions to be correct. So a dash just means that that entity does not have that permission. And then the third one, I believe, is just like other. So if they're not in the group and they're not specified as the user, then they get the other permissions. So here they would only get read and executable. And you might be asking why executable? Well, you need executable to traverse a directory. So in order to like cd into a directory, you need that executable permission, or else you can't even go into the directory. Okay, we're going down the permissions rabbit hole, but it's really something that if you want to be a Linux power user, which I am by no means one of those, you need to learn the permissions. So hopefully I'm not misleading anybody here, because again, I'm like the blind leading the blind, but uh, this is my understanding of how the permissions work. So the first thing we need to do, like I said, is add SMB users as an owner of the My Share folder. And we can do that with sudo chown change ownership -r recursively. So if you already have files and folders in there, we're going to change the ownership for everything associated with the My Share drive or folder. And then if we wanted to change the ownership of the user and the group, you'd specify the user and then you do a colon and specify the group. But because we only want to change the group, we're going to leave the user owner as root. We can do a colon and then just type SMB users and then what we're actually changing the ownership of, and that's the My Share. And if we do ls-l/media, we see SMB users is now an owner of the My Share. But even though Hake hardware is in the SMB users and the SMB users has ownership of the My Share, I still can't write, or this one over here, I still can't write. So we need to update our permissions. Sudo chmod -r recursively. So again, we want to do this for everything associated with that folder. 0775, and that's basically going to keep the last part the same, that's 5. For 7, we're going to add the W here, and then 7, we're maintaining what we already have. And then, of course, the location that we want to do the modifications to. Now if I do ls-l again, /media, now we see we have that second W here. So now we, as a group, have writable access. And we can test that by doing make dir media my share test. And so we have writable access. And we do ls-l media my share, we can see that I've created this. Now, the problem that I personally have with this is I want to maintain the same ownership for all files and folders regardless of who created them. So I wanted to inherit basically the ownership of the parent directory, or the like when I create something in My Share, I want it to be representative of this. So one more thing we need to do is sudo chmod -r g+s. So this is basically saying like inherit the group, and I actually I'm not 100% sure it's going to inherit the root as well. I think it might just be inheriting the group, but let's give this a test. We can always test things out, and we'll do it to My Share. And let's just create another directory. So make directory media My Share test 2. That wouldn't work because I didn't do that. Okay, so it looks like my assumptions here were wrong. I think I would have to do like group and user, like GU+S or something like that for the user and the group. But if we think about it, I might actually go back and change this because it annoys me. But for the purpose of this video, as long as we have the ownership of the group correct, that will grant everybody in that user the appropriate access because they're going to have this read write and well, it says S now, but like that's just the change that we made with changing the G to plus S. I don't really know why it changed from X to S. I think it just has something to do with like how the directory is set up now for the ownership. So anywho, it doesn't really matter. Again, like permissions perplex me. I'm like I said, I'm pretty sure if we change this command a little bit, we could also have it so that the user inherits the ownership of the parent, but not a big deal. Let's move on to the next step, or else I'm going to be here forever and we're never going to finish this. We're going to create a specific user that is special. They cannot log into Linux. So we'll do sudo user add -s /sbin /no login. So basically this means we're creating a user, but they're not able to log in. So you can't SSH into this computer with the username and password that we create. And then -g because we want to add them to a group, smb users. And then I'm going to call it just my user, but you could name it whatever you want. And at this point, this user is created. They don't have a password yet, and we don't need a password for Linux. We need a password for Samba. So we're going to run another command here, sudo smb password, passwd-a, my user. Now you're going to be able to set up an smb password. So to do that, I'm just going to put in password because I need to remember this. So I'm just going to use password. You should put in like a really good password. And don't forget it. If you have like a password manager, definitely add it to that. And now we need to restart Samba so that our config changes and everything has been applied. So sudo systemctl restart smbd. And you can test to make sure everything is good by doing sudo systemctl status smbd. Now we can see it's active, it's enabled, which means when I reboot, it's going to start automatically, ready to serve connections. So we are good to go. At this point, our shared drive exists in the wild. We're in the money. So now we're going to jump into how to mount this drive in Windows. And let me go back to Firefox. The first thing you're going to have to do is make sure CIFS client is enabled in Windows. So for Windows 11, you're going to type in turn Windows features on or off in the search bar. You're going to click on this little match that comes up. You're going to scroll down when the pop-up loads. You're going to scroll down to smb 1.0/CIFS. Hit the plus, select the client. You can leave the other two unselected and then click OK or install. I'm not sure what the wording is in Windows, but you want to install this Windows feature, and it's probably going to force you to reboot, and it'll probably say like installing updates. Just let it do its process, log back in, bring everything back up, and we're able to then go ahead and add the network location. So I'm showing you this here in the guide because when I actually show it to you in my Explorer, which, let's see, cool. All right, you can see my Explorer. You can see some of it. There's like a big black bar probably for you. When I right click, you can't see that I'm the context menus that come up. So you'll have to reference the guide if you want to see, what I'm talking about for some of this. So let me bring up, so I already have Hake shared. That's, one that I've already had, I set up earlier. I'm going to right click, and again, you don't see it, but I'm clicking add a network location. Now, going to bring in this new window. There's going to be like pop-ups after pop-ups. So again, bear with me here. I'm going to try and get this stuff shared as quickly as I can, but you're just going to click next, choose a custom location or choose a custom network location, just click next. Here's where you need to put in the IP address of your server that has a Samba share. So let's just hide a bunch of stuff here real quick. Boom. You can find your host name or your IP address with host name -I. For me, it's this first one. These are for Docker. So yours should be something like 192.168. Now, you probably already knew it, but I just wanted to make sure. Let's bring back up this little input box here. We're going to do // 192.168.69.101 / Now it automatically came up for me. You can't see it. I'm just going to click it and it populates. That's what it means by browsable, I think. Remember, you're going to put in your IP address and then your shared name. And this is, remember, what I had in the config as the name of my share. I'm going to click next. And you can rename it to something user-friendly. So it doesn't matter if you have spaces. I'm just going to do my share. And then I leave it checked, open this network location. When I'm finished, I click finish. And then immediately this pops up. Let me just boom. Okay. So those are the two test folders that I created. You can see now that I have access on Windows, and I can actually do, let's say, like new text file, my new text file. And and let's just say I don't want this one anymore. I'm going to delete it. Okay. Now let's hide this. Come back into here and we'll do ls-l media, my share, and we can see by default our user, so the user that we created, it took that user, but it also gave it the SMB users permissions. So in here I could do rm media, my share, my new text file, and I can modify it. So as you can see, permissions were maintained because automatically the group gets the ownership, and the ownership allows for them to have read and write permissions. So perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Okay, let's see. Anything else here for Windows? Oh yeah, you didn't see it. I didn't have a chance to show it, but I had to use my login that I created earlier for Samba, the my user, and then the password, which was password. There's going to be a pop-up. There's going to be a pop-up like this, and you're going to have to put in my user and password, and whatever yours were. And I usually click remember my credentials, so I don't have to do it every single time I log into Windows. Let's move on to Linux. Okay. Whew. This is a lot. So I've been on Jack for a while. Now we're going to go into Milton because I want to mount the drive that we just created in Milton. So please, hopefully this works. It should be pretty easy. So like usual, we're going to do sudo apt update because we do need to install some dependencies, which I've already installed here. So likely you're going to have to install them, but it's just going to say I probably already have them. So sifs-utils. Yeah, so I already have it. It should install it for you. You need sifs in order to create a mount point in fstab so that the share drive mounts automatically on boot. So next thing we're going to do is create a credentials file. Now I think I already have it created, but you're just going to do sudo nano etc samba. Oh, I don't have a credentials created, so we're going to create it. Credentials, yeah, that's how you spell it. And we're going to do username equals my user, password equals password. Now, you'll put in whatever you set, hopefully not what I set, because that's terrible, but we'll do Control X, then we'll hit Y, then we'll hit Enter to make those changes. And now what we can do is set up a mount point. Well, actually, okay, before we do that, we have to set, I don't want just anybody to have access to etc Samba credentials. It probably is owned just by root, so let's just do etc Samba. Yeah, it's already only owned by root, but let's just double check. We'll do sudo chmod 600. So if the group changes, basically won't have access. Etc Samba credentials. I don't know what guide I did that I was just doing research on, but they wanted me to basically wipe all the credentials except for the user. Only the root user will have access to this. So if the group changes, they still won't have access. And nobody even has read access. So I guess that's good. We actually removed like read access, which is what we want to do. We don't want anybody else to see that credentials. Let's clear this out. And now let's make the mount point. So let me see. Yeah, I don't have a mount point yet. So we do need to create a mount point where we're going to mount this Samba share. So I'm going to do sudo make dir media, media, and then I'm just going to call it shared. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is set the permissions of this shared drive so that the current user has access. So when I mount this drive, I want to actually have access. And it's actually, I want to test this out because I'm not totally sure on this. And I want to see if we do need to modify the permissions of media shared. So instead of doing this, we might come back to this step if we need to. So what I want to do is mount the shared drive through our I ran out of batteries. So I haven't been able to make this video without something going wrong. Last time I was like halfway through it, and I do these in one take. Somebody rang the doorbell and I had to go answer it, and then I just had to redo the whole thing again. So I'm not going to redo it just because my battery ran out. Let's just keep going. I'm going to do a little bit of experimentation. I'm going off script here. So let's do sudo nano etc file system tab. And I already have a different project, autonomous, and then I have my RAID mount already. But what I want to do is mount a Samba. So do Samba, and we'll do // 192.168.69.101 my share. So if you remember correctly, that's what we named it. I'm going to do a tab, media/shared. We're going to do sifs, and then we're going to do credentials equals, and this is where we etc Samba credentials. We'll do comma, and so we're going to mount this as the UID equals 1000. Okay, now I'm actually positive that we're going to need to change the permissions of the media/shared folder because we're mounting it as the UID 1000, which is Hake hardware, and the GID equals 1000, which is Hake hardware, but the group ID for Hake hardware. And I'll show you that in a second. We'll do IO charset equals UTF-8, tab 0, control X, Y, enter. So again, we saw this earlier. I did ID Hake hardware. My UID is 1000, GID is 1000. Because I set that I was mounting it as that user, I think I'm going to run into permission problems if I don't set the ownership of that mount point to Hake hardware, at least the Hake hardware group. So, but I want to check it out. So we'll do sudo mount-av. Okay, we successfully mounted it. So ls-l media. Okay, so perfect. It did. Okay, I was wrong. It mounted it with the ownership. That's what the UID GID must have done, is it set the ownership basically of the shared folder to the current user, which was me. Okay, we're going to do some testing here, but we'll do df-h, and we can see that that is my share drive here. and it has 1.7 terabytes, which is about what I expected for the available. Now, the test here is, can I make a directory and can I make a file? So make dir media shared test. Oh, it already exists. Oh, that scared me for a second. Okay, I can make something. Now let's just do touch media shared please work.txt. Yes. Okay, now boom, Explorer. I don't want to do that Explorer. I want a different Explorer. Here we go. Okay. And you can see what I created is visible here. And if I go and delete it, and I just delete everything, and then I hide this again, and I do ls-l media shared, boom, nothing's there. If I come back over here and I do ls-l media my share, boom, nothing. So everything basically is staying in sync. All the permissions appear to work. One thing we didn't do was like, let's do touch media shared can't touch this.txt, and then ls-l media my share. Okay, perfect. So it did create it under the perfect ownership here, and I can touch this. So I'm going to remove it. And we have access. Okay, I did it. Everything works. We now have, to recap, we created that folder, we set up the config, and we set up a user so that a specific Samba user or anybody in the Samba group locally has access to that folder. And then we can log in with those credentials on our Linux machine by using the credentials file, or our Windows machine using just the Windows login, and have access. And when anybody creates a file or creates a folder, everybody else has access. And we don't get any permission denied or any other issues like that. So we're good. Hopefully that was helpful. I know it's probably rougher than like what you see with other YouTubers, but look, I learn these things so that I can then pass them on to other people. Hopefully I'm not like giving out bad information. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, give me a thumbs up. If you made it all the way through, give me a thumbs up. That definitely lets me know and kind of motivates me to make more of these. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.